A Different History by the Indian poet Sujata Bhatt was published in her debut collection Brunism in 1988. Born in post-colonial India in 1956, Bhatt grew up in Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat before emigrating to the United States at the age of 12. She now lives with her family in Bremen, Germany. The British Raj refers to the period of British colonial rule in India from 1858 to 1947. During this time, India was ruled directly by the British government. Colonialism reshaped Indian society, economy, and culture, with English becoming a key administrative language. The independence movement, led by figures like Mahatma Gandhi, ultimately led to India's freedom in 1947. This period, however, left lasting legacies in post-colonial India, including the widespread use of English in government, law, education, business, and international relations. Writers like Bhatt, born after independence, grapple with the cultural impact of colonialism, while simultaneously reclaiming the English language to express Indian experiences. Bhatt has described herself as writing Indian English rather than Anglo-Indian poetry. The term Anglo-Indian emphasises cultural assimilation, or the blending of Indian culture into British culture, with all the associations of colonial power structures that involves, while the term Indian English emphasises the Indian perspective and cultural roots that shape Bhatt's poetry, even though it is written in English. English is therefore used as a tool to express uniquely Indian experiences, traditions, and identities, reflecting the rich linguistic and cultural diversity of India. Bhatt's distinction underscores the idea that English, though introduced by colonisers, has been reclaimed by Indian writers as a valid and powerful means of expression. She is not writing poetry that is solely defined by its use of English or by its connection to British literary traditions. Instead, she uses English to give voice to Indian experiences. Her language is rooted in her Indian cultural identity, which includes not only her personal experiences, but also the histories, traditions, and languages of India. In the poem, Bhatt reflects on the complexities of cultural identity, colonisation, and language. Set against the backdrop of India's rich cultural heritage, the poem explores how history, religion, and language shape personal and collective identities. Bhatt contrasts the reverence for books and knowledge in Indian tradition with the painful legacy of British colonialism, particularly the imposition of the English language. Through vivid imagery and a reflective tone, Bhatt explores the impact of cultural assimilation and the survival of native traditions. The poem ultimately expresses a deep ambivalence towards the past, acknowledging both its oppressive weight and its inescapable influence on the present. While it critiques the legacy of colonialism and the imposition of foreign languages and cultures, it also recognises the paradox of having to live with and even embrace these inherited elements, leaving the speaker, and by extension the reader, caught between reverence for tradition and the desire for autonomy. The poem comprises 2 stanzas of 18 and 11 lines respectively. It is written in free verse, which means that it has neither a fixed metrical or rhythmic structure, nor a set rhyme scheme. Bhatt instead modulates the rhythm and creates musicality and cohesion with varying line lengths of between 3 and 11 syllables. Enjambment, which is where the sense of one line runs on to the next without any punctuation. Anaphora, such as it is a sin to, without, which language, and after the, and sound patterning techniques, such as sibilance, e.g. sacred, sin, aside, slam, and carelessly, and combinations of harsh, guttural, and forceful plosive and nasal consonant sounds. A number of words such as pan, gods, sacred, sin, and Sarasvati form a semantic field of religion and mythology. The title, A Different History, encapsulates the poem's exploration of language, identity, and cultural heritage through its re-examination and reclamation of cultural identity and history. History is, after all, never an objective collection of facts, but is, rather, a narrative that has been written by the winning side. Bhatt invites readers instead to consider a different history, or an alternative narrative that honours the richness of her heritage, as a contrast to the dominant colonial narratives that often overshadow indigenous cultures. The title serves as a commentary on the singular, often Euro and Christocentric histories that dominate mainstream narratives, and suggests that multiple histories do exist and do deserve recognition. The poem begins with the assertion that Great Pan is not dead. Pan is a god of nature and wild places in ancient Greek mythology. During the 1st century AD, the Greek historian Plutarch reported that an Egyptian sailor had overheard a divine voice calling across the water that Great Pan is dead. Because this occurred during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, who ruled at the time of Christ, Christians came to believe that it signified a shift from paganism to Christianity in the Western world. This belief suggested that, as Christianity gained prominence, the old gods like Pan faded from relevance. Bhatt's speaker, however, argues that rather than dying, he simply emigrated to India. In other words, even though ancient myths and belief systems may have faded in the West to be overshadowed by Christianity, they are still alive and kicking in India, where reverence for nature, gods, and mythology in the Hindu religion remains deeply ingrained in everyday life. There may also, however, be another layer to this image, in that it could be an ironic comment on the way that Western ideas were exported to and imposed upon India during colonial rule, leading to a complex blending of cultural identities. She continues, here the gods roam freely, disguised as snakes and monkeys. The verb roam, modified by the adverb freely, evokes an image of the sacred and the profane mingling on the earth without restriction. By depicting gods in ordinary forms, Bhatt seems to emphasise here the immanence of the divine in the everyday, reflecting a belief that spirituality is not confined to grand temples or rituals, but can be found in the common experiences of life. This suggests that the divine is accessible and present in all beings. Not only this, but every tree is sacred. In India, trees are seen as the origin of life, and every tree has a deity who is worshipped, respected, and given offerings. Consequently, books, which are made from paper, which is in turn made from wood, are also considered sacred and must be shown the same degree of reverence, to the extent that it is a sin to be rude to a book. Note the use of personification here, which gives books sentience, i.e., the possession of sensation and consciousness, not only to indicate their status, but also to highlight the deep cultural belief in the sanctity of knowledge and the written word. That speaker elaborates on what this rudeness entails. It is a sin to shove a book aside with your foot, a sin to slam books down hard on a table, a sin to toss one carelessly across a room. Note the way Bhatt chops these poetic lines into small units to create a visually punchy structure which mirrors the violence that is being described. The anaphoric repetition of "it is a sin" and "a sin to," and the prevalence of hissing, sibilant, hard guttural and forceful, plosive and nasal sounds across these lines also enhances this idea. This reverence due to books reflects a broader understanding of the interconnectedness between nature and human intellect, emphasizing that knowledge, like nature, should be treated with care and respect. Indeed, you must learn to turn the pages gently, without disturbing Sarasvati, without offending the tree from whose wood the paper was made. Sarasvati is the Hindu goddess of knowledge, learning, music and art, who, it is believed, is incarnated in every book. Note how Bhatt structures her verse in longer, much smoother poetic lines at the end of the stanza here, which contrast with the short, choppy lines above, to evoke the calmness and care with which a book should be handled in order to show it the deference and devotion which are its due. Bhatt is, however, also known for the ambivalence and duality present in her work. We could also therefore argue that the use of anaphora here, with the repetition of "it is a sin," the shorter phrase "a sin to," and the adverb "without," also emphasises the way that this reverence and the rigid rules and societal expectation it necessitates can become overwhelming and oppressive. This tension between admiration and criticism is not uncommon in post-colonial writing, where the writer communicates pride in the cultural heritage, but may also examine how traditions can sometimes become a burden. In the second stanza, Bhatt's speaker turns her attention to language. Which language has not been the oppressor's tongue? Which language truly meant to murder someone? Her use of rhetorical questions here, with the implicit answer "no language," suggests that various languages have been used throughout history to marginalise and control different populations. The personification of language in the second rhetorical question, whereby she gives it the intent, or not, to kill, suggests that languages in and of themselves are neutral, in that they do not inherently possess the capacity for harm or oppression. Rather, it is the intent and actions of those who use language that can turn it either into a means of articulating beauty, love and identity, or into a tool for violence and subjugation. In other words, it can be a vehicle for both expression and oppression, depending on how it is wielded. The poem concludes, "And how does it happen that after the torture, after the soul has been cropped with the long scythe swooping out of the conqueror's face?" The unborn grandchildren grow to love that strange language. Bhatt's speaker now reflects on the aftermath of the British colonisers wielding the English language as a weapon to violently subjugate India and crush the spirit of its people. Note the use of graphic imagery here to convey the level of brutality and destruction wrought on them. A scythe is a tool with a long curved blade at the end of a large pole. Used for cutting crops, such as grass or corn, it is also associated with the Grim Reaper, the personification of death. The verb to crop in this context means to shorten something by cutting it down to the ground. The verb swooping suggests the way in which a predator pounces on its prey. Bhatt uses the multi-layered image of the scythe as a powerful metaphor for a foreign language, in this case English. Another word for language is tongue, and when something concrete, i.e. a tongue, is used to describe something abstract, i.e. language, it is called metonymy. In Bhatt's metaphor, however, the abstract concept of language returns to the concrete, as the tongue in the form of a scythe literally seems to swoop grotesquely out of the conqueror's face, cropping or cutting down the soul of the Indian people as it goes, in order to leave fresh earth for the seeds of its own language and culture to be planted. Note the sibilants present in soul, scythe and swooping, the hissing of which seems to mimic the swish of the weapon as it slices through the air. The very physicality of this image suggests that Bhatt feels this imposition of language viscerally, as an act of aggression which is tantamount to a cultural massacre. Note the use of a dash at the end of the 9th line of the stanza, rather than a comma, to separate the clauses. This provides an even stronger visual separation in order to evoke the psychological disconnect between the past trauma of cultural displacement and the future generations who, knowing no different, will grow to love that strange language. In other words, despite its oppressive roots, over time people adapt and the language gradually becomes a part of their identity. This adaptation leads them to embrace it, not just as a relic of oppression, but also as a practical and global tool, which can be reclaimed and transformed into something empowering. The final 7 lines of the poem comprise a single thought. The intricacy of this mirrors its complexity and unanswerability, as nearly a century of political, social, economic and linguistic subjugation were not simply erased by India regaining its independence in 1947. Although introduced with the vocabulary and structure of a rhetorical question, i.e., and how does it happen, it is in fact punctuated with a full stop rather than a question mark, which renders it a statement that refuses resolution or simplification. This punctuation choice reinforces the poem's central tension. Questions of language, identity and history resist easy answers. By closing off the inquiry with finality, yet leaving the complexities unresolved, Bhatt effectively mirrors the ongoing struggle to reconcile the past with the present. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.